Hi, my name is Elizabeth Manriquez, and I'm a librarian at the University of Wisconsin Law School Library. In this short webinar, we're going to discuss the Access to Justice Gap, or simply Justice Gap, and ways you can help your patrons bridge it. This is the roadmap for our webinar. We'll begin by defining the Justice Gap, and then discussing who it affects. You've most likely had patrons come to your library who are experiencing a civil legal issue and ask you for assistance. We'll discuss resources you can include in your library collection that can help them with their legal needs. And we'll conclude by outlining organizations available in the state of Wisconsin where your patrons can seek low or no-cost legal assistance. So let's get started. Defined by LSC, or the Legal Services Corporation, the Justice Gap is the difference between the needs of low-income Americans and the resources available to meet those needs. The Sixth Amendment secures the right to counsel in criminal proceedings, but there is no such guarantee for civil matters. Unfortunately, most Americans will face a civil proceeding in their lifetime, whether it be divorce, an eviction, disability, or a workers' compensation claim. Most of us will need to navigate the civil litigation system at some point. This system can be complicated for those who are not trained in the law, and intimidating to most anyone. And the experience can affect our physical and mental health. There are not enough resources currently to meet the needs of Americans. LSC is publicly funded, a 501c3 nonprofit corporation established by the U.S. Congress in 1974 with bipartisan congressional sponsorship and is funded through the congressional appropriations process. LSC's mission is to promote equal access to justice in our nation and to provide high-quality civil legal assistance to low-income persons. Their primary activity in service of this mission is providing grants to legal aid organizations serving all U.S. states and territories. They released a report in 2017 with some staggering numbers. It found 86% of civil legal problems reported by low-income Americans received inadequate or no legal help. 71% of low-income households experienced at least one civil legal problem in the last year. And in 2017, low-income Americans approached LSC-funded legal aid organizations for support with an estimated 1.7 million problems. And COVID only exacerbated this problem. LSC released a follow-up report this year, 2022, and the numbers are bleak. There was a 6% increase in inadequacy of civil legal support for low-income Americans, while 3% more low-income Americans will experience at least one civil legal problem this year. And the annual number of problems of low-income Americans seeking assistance through LSC increased by 200,000. This means more low-income Americans are in need of assistance with more civil legal problems at a time when fewer are able to receive adequate help due to a lack of resources. Now, who are we talking about? Who are the millions of Americans affected by this gap in resources? For the purposes of qualifying for assistance in many programs, low income is defined as those with a household income at or below 125% of the federal poverty level, or FPL. Poverty guidelines are issued annually by the Department of Health and Human Services. Under this standard, about 50 million Americans are considered low income, many of them children and seniors. Statistically, about 9 million of them live in the Midwest, and 75% of them will have at least one civil legal problem in a year and will require legal assistance. To put the picture into perspective, the current 2022 FPL for a family of four is $27,750. Per a chart on the HHS website, 125% of the 2022 poverty guideline for a family of four is $34,688. So, a family must make less than $35,000 a year to even qualify for a federally funded program offering legal assistance. There are many Americans making more than that amount, but less than what is required to afford hiring a private attorney. This brings us to ALICE, a term coined by the United Way. It defines a group of Americans that often fall through the cracks of our social safety net. They make more than the federal poverty level, but still can't make ends meet. The United Way of Wisconsin released a report in 2020 about Alice in Wisconsin. They found that in 2018, 34% of Wisconsin's approximately 2.4 million households struggled to make ends meet. However, only 11% of Wisconsin households were at or below the FPL. That means that 23% of Wisconsin households were Alice households in 2018. That's over 550,000 Wisconsin households struggling to afford basic household necessities, but making too much to qualify for federal assistance. And most of them will face a civil legal problem this year. This slide is taken from the 2017 LSC Justice Gap Report. It illustrates the prevalence of civil legal problems as they are experienced by different already vulnerable groups. These groups represent many of our fellow Wisconsinites, such as seniors, rural residents, veterans, persons with disabilities, parents of children under 18, and survivors of domestic and sexual assault. Following the release of the Justice Gap Report in 2017, a group of professors released their article, Legal Deserts, a Multi-State Perspective on Rural Access to Justice. This article consisted of a survey of 6 states and their rural access to justice. Northeastern Minnesota and northern Wisconsin, or the Northland, was one of those states. The survey found, while the northern portions of each state share similar geographies, demographics, and growing rates of poverty and unemployment, the types of political and funding supports for low-income rural residents and rural attorneys are markedly different. Since 2012, Minnesota created the state's Obamacare healthcare exchange and raised taxes by $2.1 billion. While Wisconsin ended collective bargaining rights for most public employees, rejected a Medicaid expansion, and cut public K-12 funding. Of particular significance, in 2011, Governor Walker eliminated Wisconsin state funding for civil legal aid. Minnesota, on the other hand, has steadily increased its legislative appropriation for state civil legal services, reaching $13.1 million in fiscal year 2017. Because they receive no state tax dollars, Wisconsin's 2 nonprofit civil legal aid providers now rely largely on federal LSC funding. Legal Action of Wisconsin, headquartered in Milwaukee, received approximately $4.1 million in LSC funds in 2018. Wisconsin Judicare, located in north central Wisconsin, received roughly $1 million. This breakdown, namely that Legal Action receives roughly 80% of the state's LSC funding, is typical for this state. LSC funds are distributed on a per capita basis according to each service area's share of the eligible poverty population. For rural organizations that rely so heavily on LSC funding, this distribution formula proves consequential and arguably problematic. Legal Action has 6 offices across the southern half of Wisconsin. Each is located in a metropolitan area and serves 2 to 10 neighboring counties. Judicare, on the other hand, has just 1 main office and is the sole legal aid provider for Wisconsin's northern 33 counties and 11 federally recognized tribes. The legal desert created by Southern concentrated funding is compounded by all of the state's law libraries and law librarians being located in the southern half of Wisconsin. The Justice Index is a snapshot of the degree to which each U.S. state has adopted best practices for ensuring access to justice for all people. The National Center for the Access to Justice has identified policies in 4 key areas that they believe every state should have in place to ensure meaningful access to justice for everyone. They are attorney access, support for self-represented litigants, language access, and disability access. They then examine the degree to which every state has actually adopted these policies. Wisconsin received a score of 49.52, with the lowest showing in the categories of self-representation and attorney access. What the data tells us is 75% of rural households will experience at least one civil legal problem in the next year, but they will have virtually no access to legal professionals or legal materials to assist them in navigating the process. Here's where you come in. Your library is probably where many of these low-income and ALICE Americans will turn to for assistance. Public libraries play an important part in increasing access to justice. In their public service and community anchor role, public libraries are critically important access points for information and resources for people dealing with complex and daunting legal issues. For many library staff, the prospect of inadvertently offering legal advice scares them away from providing legal reference service. I hope that the material which we will cover today and in this 5-part series will help to relieve those worries and provide you with the tools to assist your patrons and bridge this gap to justice. The legal reference interview can seem daunting at first, but the more you learn and prepare for the types of questions you may get, the more comfortable you will feel connecting your patrons with resources, just like you do in any other type of reference question. I recommend these resources for learning the ins and outs of the legal reference interview. There are some hard guidelines to follow and just some pointers that will assist you. Part 1 of this 5-part series with my colleague Carol Hassler walks you through the highlights of the legal reference interview. She explains things clearly and concisely, and I recommend you watch it for more information. Personally, I'm more of a visual learner than auditory, so I prefer a book. These 4 books are economical, recently published, and excellent resources for yourself or your patrons, and can be helpful additions to your collection. On this slide are 4 government websites and 4 examples of the types of resources you can find there. These resources can be included on a research guide or your library's website, directing your patrons to reliable government information. The GPO provides access to authenticated federal primary law and other documents created by the 3 branches of government. We will discuss sources of law in more detail in Part 4 of this series next month. For now, know that you can access these laws through the GPO. The Wisconsin State Law Library's website is a vast collection of resources. I encourage you to sit down with the site and click your way through the tabs. There's a lot to explore, and the more familiar you are with the resources available, the best you can direct a patron researching a civil legal matter. The Wisconsin Legislature site provides access to Wisconsin statutes, regulations, and helpful guides for citizens. The Wisconsin Access to Justice Commission was created by the Wisconsin Supreme Court at the request of the State Bar of Wisconsin to aid the courts in improving the administration of justice. Their mission is to develop and encourage means of expanding access to the civil legal system for unrepresented, low-income Wisconsin residents. They have several resources available on their website. The 4 guides are examples of resources created by the court system to add pro se, also known as self-represented, litigants through the court system. You can often find these types of guides on court websites or by searching for the clerk of court of a specific county. In addition to the free resources available to pro se litigants, you might think of including these databases in your collection. Courtroom 5 is an online toolbox that helps self-represented litigants handle their cases from start to finish. Available for civil cases only, it allows users to set up and manage their case, build and strengthen their case, and prepare for and present in court. According to the founder, our goal is to simplify the process as much as possible for people who, first of all, really don't want to be in court, and secondly, don't have the legal background. FastCase is a vendor database with access to case law, statutes, regulations, and court rules. Although those materials are freely available on government websites, it packages it together with some bells and whistles and is more intuitive for a novice legal researcher. It is also far more economical than any other legal research database, so if you have the budget to add one to your collection, this might be the right one for you. Court Listener and Google Scholar are both free databases where you can conduct case law research. As discussed in part 1 in more detail, many patrons can be upset when they arrive at your library, or can be defensive or difficult to assist. In part 2, Carol provides insights for de-escalating these situations. And while it can be upsetting to encounter these patrons, patience is key. Their issues often involve basic needs and can be frightening to face. Housing, healthcare, custody. These issues are at the essence of our lives and can have far-reaching effects, particularly for patrons with more than one civil problem. What can you do when your patron requires more assistance than being connected with legal resources? As librarians, we are barred from providing legal advice, and this includes assisting with the filling out of forms, a request that many patrons may make of you. In these cases, it's best to direct your patron to resources outside of your library. Many patrons may not realize that they need an attorney to assist them in their civil matter. They are used to going it alone, and that is their first instinct. The table on this slide is taken from the 2022 LSC survey. It found that even when dealing with a problem with substantial impact on their lives, only 25% of low-income Americans sought legal help with their problem. There are many causes for this, but one is just a simple lack of knowledge. Marquette has a legal checkup handout on their website, providing links to organizations that provide assistance with specific legal matters that many Americans may not realize that they can get assistance with, such as navigating probate or registering to vote. You can also refer your patron to the State Bar of Wisconsin's Lawyer Referral and Information Service. Speaking of Marquette, their volunteer legal clinics are an example of an organization you can point your patrons to if they cannot afford legal representation. They serve all of Wisconsin, including northern and rural areas, in a variety of legal areas and have a ton of resources on their website. Please check them out when you have time. Here at the University of Wisconsin, we also have several clinics that serve low-income individuals through our Economic Justice Institute. Matters include workers' compensation, family court matters, and immigration. The Tenant Resource Center and the Greater Wisconsin Agency on Aging Resources are examples of organizations that provide assistance in a particular legal area. All of the organizations featured on the slide and the next two can be easily found by Googling the organization name if you would like for more information on the resources available. Community Immigration Law Center, Wisconsin Legal Assistance for Military Personnel, Disability Rights Wisconsin, and Legal Aid Society of Milwaukee. These are further examples of organizations that provide assistance in a particular area of law or to assist a particular vulnerable population. CW Solutions, NewCap, Wisconsin Emergency Rental Assistance, Judicare Legal Aid. These are examples of organizations that provide assistance to central and northern Wisconsin. Resources can be harder to find for this part of the state for the reasons already discussed at the top of our webinar, but there are options. Please explore these resources for further information. For additional information on resources available by region or topic, the Wisconsin State Law Library has an interactive tool on their website which will swiftly connect you or your patron with organizations serving in a specific legal or geographic area. And that concludes our webinar today. I hope you are left with a better understanding of what patrons are facing and how we can assist them using the skills we have as librarians. If you have any questions about the resources discussed today, or have a patron who comes to you with a civil legal problem and you don't feel comfortable assisting them, please contact a law librarian. We are here to help you and your patrons. We can be contacted in multiple ways and have a large expanse of reference hours available. Thank you for tuning in today and happy researching.